Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance. The CFO role is changing rapidly, moving from cost controller to strategic visionary. And with every change comes opportunity. We are here to help you take advantage of this transition, to win at work, drive your career forwards, and lead with confidence. Join Hannah Munro, Managing Director of ITAS, a financial transformation consultancy, as she interviews key experts to give you real-world advice and guidance on how to transform your processes, people, and data. Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance.
So hello everybody and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. My name is Hannah Munro and today I'm talking with Phil Moses, who is the CFO of Octavius. So welcome Phil, great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Hannah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. What was your journey to CFO?
Journey to TFO, well, it's been a while now, but I guess it sort of started with being a maths graduate from Warwick University, and I always had a bent for numbers in terms of, numbers talk to me, so it was quite a natural thing to do mathematics at university. Although mathematics at university is quite theoretical, and I was always some of my friends were studying accountancy, and it seemed a little bit more commercial and a bit more real world stuff than the sort of pure maths I was studying. So I chose accounting when I left university. I didn't fancy the traditional audit route necessarily, and I wanted to get straight into business. So I studied my accounting at Legal and General. They had an ACCA training scheme, and that's how I got into it really. And I think you realise after a while that whether I like it or not, I am an accountant. That is how my brain works. It's not necessarily the most exciting thing, but it is quite nice to be in the zone and be good at what be in the zone of what you're good at. So then I stayed at Legal and General for 5 or 6 years. They had a very good graduate scheme, which enabled me to get a real good grounding in all of the basics of accounting, which sometimes people miss out on. So billing, accounts payable, accounts receivable, managing all of those sorts of things. And so getting the full basic grounding, internal audit, etc., so that as you move up, you understand, even if you're not into the detail of every process, you understand what people have to do right throughout the business. So I think that was a real positive, that I got that basic grounding. And I was working with people who hadn't been to university, so you also get a grounding in managing people and dealing with people who haven't had the same opportunities you've had in life, so that you can deal with people at all levels of all sorts of people. So that was a very positive thing to learn there. So I was 6 years at Legal and General, and then insurance can be a little bit theoretical and a little bit intangible. So I wanted something more tangible. And an opportunity came up at BT. They were transforming their organization, and an opportunity came up to be a financial analyst at BT. And telecom seemed like an exciting world. I'd love to say I predicted the roller coaster ride that was telecoms for the next 19 years, but I probably didn't. It just seemed a bit more exciting than insurance. But if you think about what happened in that period, you had narrowband internet invented, you had mobile phones, you had ADSL, which was really exciting because it was half a megabit, that was a huge speed at the time. You had 3G, we had global expansion. BT had operations in 24 countries. Then we rolled out fiber. Then you had 4G, etc. So all of that in that sort of 19-year period leading up to 2010. So it was very exciting to be involved in that industry during that boom period, and see some of the transformational things that were happening in that industry that have transformed all our lives. So it was very exciting. And I think, as I moved up the ranks, I realized that, always trying to go the extra mile, always trying to put your best foot forward, take on important work. When someone needs something done, you're the guy who can do it, and treating people well, like you'd expect them to treat you. And that seemed to work for me. I never had a grand plan to be a CFO. I just, gradually improved on things I was doing, and people obviously liked what I was doing and saw that they could trust me with more senior roles. And I worked through it from there, from analyst to planning manager, commercial manager, head of business planning for the global division, then head of products and solutions finance, and then back to global as divisional CFO. And that was my first sort of real step up to a divisional CFO within BT. BT being a massive organization, you had 5 or 6 divisional CFOs as well as the group CFO. And then I did investor relations for 7 years, it turned out, for British Telecom, and also group financial controller. So I couple the two roles together. That's uncommon. Often the investor relations person is from the city, from the investment industry, whereas I was an internal candidate. So I was able to couple the group controller role together with investor relations, which meant that often I could answer questions in more depth than perhaps somebody whose focus had always been the city. And that was interesting because you're involved in everything that's going on in the company. So you're spending time with the CEO and the CFO, and that develops you as well, right? You get to understand how they handle people, how they handle difficult situations, etc. And then my final position in BT was Openreach CFO. So Openreach runs 35,000 men in vans, fixing wires and poles and digging holes, etc. So that's the infrastructure bit of BT. And interestingly, that sort of led me into a career in infrastructure since then. So I moved sort of from insurance to telecoms, from telecoms to the infrastructure part of telecoms. And when I left BT, I joined a company called Arqiva that manages all of our mobile towers, a lot of mobile towers and broadcasting in the UK. So all the TV broadcasting of Freeview, ITV, BBC is managed by them. And there's lots of infrastructure that does that, large towers, TV broadcasting towers, and also the small mobile towers. So I moved from telecoms to Openreach infrastructure and then to broadcasting infrastructure. And when you're changing jobs, I always found that it's best to bring something to the party. So I had a lot of telco knowledge, but I didn't know about the broadcasting industry. My CEO was from the broadcasting industry from ITV, and he didn't know a lot about telco. So it was quite a good team that we could teach each other about both parts of it. So that was helpful. And that was my first PE job. So I'd done the PLC role in terms of managing investor relations and all of that entails for a PLC. And this was my first PE role, and there were 5 shareholders, and the company was very highly geared. So we had a lot of debt which needed refinancing, and that was the main challenge at the beginning. And we'd spent 3 years doing that. I had 2 fantastic treasurers working for me, and we got away the biggest debt bond issue that year in the market. And then that put the company on a very stable platform. And then some years later, when shareholders were looking to exit, they were breaking the company up. So that's when I chose to move on. It became a smaller company. And I went to from sort of telco to infrastructure, and then a different type of infrastructure, London City Airport. So an airport is also infrastructure. You're basically landing planes, and you're charging for every time some wheels touch the ground or leave the ground, in effect. And so you're investing in the infrastructure and that is what gets you your returns. And then you've just got to get as much volume through that infrastructure as possible. So it's very similar to towers business, bizarrely. And it was financed in the same way. It had 4 shareholders, all of which were pension funds, and it was financed with lots of debt. And they needed someone to come in the interim when they were changing management to just keep the show on the road in terms of debt management and reporting and stuff like that. So I did that for 9 months. It was really interesting. But if you boil it down, running an airport infrastructure from a finance perspective is just the same as running a towers business, which doesn't sound like that would be the case. But from a financial perspective, it's pretty much the same.
And you mentioned with a couple of them that you did a lot of restructuring of finance. And when you got those roles and you came in and you noticed, obviously, that first PE role, there was a huge amount of debt. Did you know you were going into a big debt restructure? Or was that something that you found out once you actually got in and looked under the hood?
No, it was always it was declared up front. That was what you were coming in to do. That was going to be your main task. And Arqiva had been financed in 2007 before the markets collapsed. If you remember, in 2007, you might not
Yeah.
be old enough, but and so the debt financing was very short-term bank loans, and all the
Yeah.
banks were wanting to get those loans off their books. So they were helping us. It was in their interest for us to get the bond issue away, and we
Mm.
had, I think, 19 banks helping us do it. It was a big issue. It was £4 billion.
Wow.
And so we spent 2.5, 3 years running that process and getting the bank loans paid off a year before they needed to be paid off, and getting the bonds away. So yeah, it was always two things you had to do. One was come in and build the finance team and build the capability to grow this company, and two was refinance that debt.
And when you think of looking back, financing that debt, it sounds like you obviously had a huge amount of success with that process, paying everything off and getting it sorted. What do you think was the things that helped make that success? What did you do as a CFO to support that?
Oh, I mean, having two treasurers who were at the top of their game in the UK was a
Yeah,
massive thing, because it was so big. It was such a big deal, and
yeah,
you need one to come up with the strategic answers for it and help sell the bonds, and the other one was doing all the technical paperwork. And you wouldn't believe how much technical paperwork there is if you're issuing bonds,
yeah,
and getting the rating agencies on side, and you've got to get the bonds rated by S&P and Moody's, etc. And having two professionals who'd been around that before enabled me to build the finance team and do all of those other things at the same time, because I had these two professionals I could rely on, and they taught me the treasury game, if you like.
yeah,
What I brought to the party was the investor relations side, because when you're issuing bonds, there's a big investor relations activity that happens as well. It's a slightly different one from equity. So
mm,
in equity investor relations, you're always trying to sell excitement and growth and upside.
yeah,
Uh, and where's this company going to go? How is this company going to grow? Why is it going to increase its profitability? In debt investor relations, it's a slightly different story. You're always trying to sell the certainty that the debt will be repaid and the interest will be repaid. So
mm,
it's sort of, there's nothing to see here. We're boringly reassuring, and we can't fail to generate the cash that's needed to pay this debt. That
yeah,
is a different story. They're not interested in the upside. They're just interested that you can repay the debt and make your interest payments. And obviously, with infrastructure, you have very high margins. You spend a lot of money up front, you borrow that money to invest, and then you earn 50% EBITDA margins, profit margins. Not quite the same when you're building infrastructure, which is what I'm doing now. When you're building infrastructure, you don't invest a huge amount of money up front, but you make 3 and 4% margins.
yeah,
So I've gone from infrastructure ownership to infrastructure build, and it's very different. So you're always looking at the cash. You're always looking at making sure every contract is going to pay you, and managing your receipts and payments so that you can always pay your suppliers. And when you live on 3% margins, you've got to be very, very strong about managing that.
And I want to dip into that sort of management of margins, because yeah, when you've got those pieces, just I guess going back to that investor relation piece, it sounds like that's something that you've done a lot of, and potentially a real strength of yours. So talk us through, how you think investor relations should be done well, and I guess where some of the challenges are with it.
Yeah. My style was always to be as open as I could with investors, and
Mm,
to feed back what investors and analysts were saying to management, so that we could develop our messaging that gave them the input and the information they wanted. Um, and providing good access to management is a key part of that, and getting our management out on the road as often as possible. Because if you're the CEO or CFO of a large PLC, the road shows are a big drain on your time,
mm.
and so you need to be well prepped, but you also recognize that CEOs and CFOs would rather not do it most of the time, right? So, because they've got other things to do. They're trying to run a company, and you're getting them to go out and do 6 meetings a day where they say the same thing.
Yeah.
That's pretty dull for them. It's also difficult for the investor relations person, because you're hearing the same thing 6 times a day. So and you get into meetings, and sometimes you can't remember whether you said something in this meeting or the last meeting or the one before. So yeah, some CEOs enjoy it, and I had one CEO particularly enjoyed it, and some don't. So it's that's part of the challenge. But you're talking to the senior people in the company, and you're sometimes feeding in messages they don't want to hear.
Mm.
So, you are saying, look, investors are not happy with our policy on this. Investors are not happy with our performance on that. And you're holding up the mirror to management, and you have to be strong about that. And often they don't like it. And sometimes you end up in a conversation where you say, look, I'm telling you what the market is going to say about this, and that is my job. So it can be tricky. It can be tricky. It's a delicate line to tread, but generally, if you've got good management, it's very simple. They'll get them out, get them talking to investors. They'll do the work for you. If you haven't got good management, hide them away.
And I guess you mentioned obviously having those difficult conversations. Is there one particular conversation that was particularly difficult, and how did you handle it? Like, talk us through that process.
Yeah, I mean, there's been more than one that was difficult. I mean, in any quarter, if your results are not what the market's expecting, you're going to have a difficult day on
Yeah.
results day, and your share price is going to suffer. So, in any of those conversations, when the results are not great, you're saying to the CEO, these results aren't great, and he'll say, well, what do you mean these results aren't great? Why are you saying that? And sometimes you get into a conversation with he'd be saying, I don't want you telling the market these results aren't great, and I'm saying, it's not me going to be telling the market that. Clearly, I won't be saying that, but the market will be saying that because I know what they're thinking and what they're expecting. So
Mm.
you have to be able to guide yourself through that difficult conversation to get the CEO or the CFO to understand the position when life is difficult, and then build the story around it, right? Together, build the story around it. So practice what the difficult questions are going to be, get through the emotional side of that, and then get on to the okay, what are we going to say? How are we going to fix this? What are we going to say we're doing? And why did it happen?
Yeah, and thinking, I guess, being prepared rather than just ignoring the fact that you might get difficult questions,
Yeah,
actually facing them early on. It
yeah,
sounds
and
like
that's a
it's
big
really
job for investor relations. That is the big thing. Prepare for the awkward questions, have the difficult conversations internally with management, get past the emotional position where nobody likes it, and then get on to coming. What are we going to actually do and say? Yeah.
yeah. And how did you find that transitional switch from obviously being heavily involved in investor relations to then moving into private equity? What was that experience like?
Yeah, it's different. It is different. So in PLC, your messaging is around stability, growth. Your reporting is all around regulatory reporting and your messaging to shareholders. And you tend to under promise and try and over deliver so that your share price is never ahead of where it should be, etc. In private equity, you're always focusing on maximizing the value of your investment from day one.
Mm.
Shareholders are much more involved in the detail, so you're not messaging them. It's not so much about messaging; it's more about sharing the detail and having across the table conversations about how we're going to change the direction of the business. And private equity don't tend to allow you much room to under promise.
Yeah.
So you can choose what you say to the PLC market. With private equity, it's a two-way conversation, and you are having that conversation face to face with the owner in effect, or the owner's representative. So it's quite different in that respect. Um, Obviously, there's a whole lot of things that are the same techniques and the same skills, but private equity, you might be talking to them every week.
Yeah.
In the PLC world, you might talk to them once a quarter, and face to face probably once a year. So, it's a very different thing. And when you're talking to private equity every week, you've got all the data there. They have all the data. You share all the data. Reporting isn't just what you choose to report, it's all the data that exists in the business because they have analysts who want to analyze the data. And they're good at that stuff, right? They're good at that stuff. And the best private equity, um, they have analysts, they analyze data, but they recognize that they're working with management to
Yeah.
deliver a better result. And the current owners of Octavius are exactly in that space. They work with management to add value and trust management to do what management do. They're not construction or civil engineer people. They're investors, and they understand the moving parts of investment. But you can't run a business on a spreadsheet, and they understand that. Some private equity don't, and they try and do exactly that. But if you've got the right owners, they understand that there is value in looking at the data and driving the business to improve based on data. But there's also value in managing people, managing customers, and that's all person to person, and it's not just data. And I think that's the key challenge with PE, is making sure that the investors you've got understand that running a business is more than just running with data, but they add the value by helping you manage your data and managing the messaging that comes out of that data and the actions you've got to take from that data.
Now, for the £1 million question. What is the best finance software for your business? Is it A, Sage 50? Is it B, Sage 200 Standard? C, Sage 200 Professional? Or D, Sage Intact? An impossible question to answer without a lifeline. But we have the perfect lifeline for you. Our free quiz, Which Sage Product is Right for You, will tell you which product is the best fit for your business in just 5 minutes. All you need to do is head to www.itassolutions.co.uk and answer a few simple questions.
And when you obviously work with the companies that were in PE, did you go into all of them knowing that it was already PE backed and who the investors were, or was it very much something that you went on that journey with the business?
So yes, I always knew that who the owners were at the time I've come in. It's never been a change of ownership from PLC to PE or vice versa in my circumstances. But the first time I went into PE, it was a bit of an eye opener about how much data you're sharing, how open you have to be with people, and how much help you get. And
Yeah.
help can be, a positive thing, like it is in the company I'm in now. I mean, it's a really positive thing that's helping us make the business better. Or help can be sometimes being told what to do when that's probably not the right thing to do. And the best PE owners have a two-way dialogue and understand that management understand what they're doing. The less good ones look at data, don't like the data, and say, well, do better. That's not particularly helpful.
And out of interest, when you went for your latest private equity role, how much due diligence did you actually do on the PE investors themselves before you chose to accept it based on your
Yeah,
experience?
so I was interviewed first by the two founder partners of Sullivan Street Partnership.
Yes.
So, and yes, they were interviewing me and I was interviewing them in some ways, because those are the people you're going to have to work with. Those are the people that are going to be driving the business to succeed. And if you feel that chemistry isn't right, then you shouldn't probably do it. Now, depends. In Arqiva, we had 5 different shareholders, all of whom had directors and analysts. So, that was a challenge to manage all of those different personalities and those different demands. Here we've got Sullivan Street, who manage on behalf of all the investors. So we're only dealing with that partnership, the 2 partners, or there's 3 partners now, and their analyst team. And so that chemistry was really important to me, particularly at that, my age. I could be a bit choosy about where I went, and I wouldn't have chosen to go to a PE house where I couldn't get on with the 2 partners.
And you mentioned, obviously, in your previous role, there was a number of different investors, all
Mm.
with their own analyst teams. Tell us a bit. You mentioned, obviously, that was challenging, and I can imagine. Tell us a bit about that challenging and how, I guess, how you managed that, any expectations and feedback
Yeah,
through that.
your messaging is the same, but often there are data demands or reporting demands that are 5 different times of the year. So they'll do their valuation. One will do it in May, one will do it in September, and they're looking for an update to your 5-year plan every time they need to do their valuation. So you've got to have a team that are ready to update things and provide data on different timescales,
Yeah.
maybe in different formats, and that can be challenging. But also, if you've got 5 investors and they're not necessarily agreeing on exit timetable or valuation, or whether they want to take a particular type of debt, managing them to get to agreement is also a challenge. And that's why management have to be very clear. That's a bit more messaging then. Then you are working on the messaging, so that in the board meeting you say, right, look, we've got competing demands here, competing thoughts, but we believe we should go in this direction, and this is why. And you have to try and sell that course of action. if you've got one shareholder, you can have those dialogues on an ongoing basis and come to a conclusion. If you've got five, you're sort of in a hybrid between a PE world and a PLC world, because you're trying to manage a messaging to five investors. It's an interesting sort of hybrid position.
And how did you manage that? Like how did you prep the team? What did you think about in how you approach things like board meetings? Was there some secret sauce to that success?
Yeah, I've learned over the years that sometimes in board meetings, I tend to try and answer questions immediately. Sometimes it's best to say, I'll take that away and then go and work on the messaging, right? So I tend to try and say yes or no and immediately if I know the answer. But I've learned over time that actually sometimes in a board meeting, people want to raise something and they want you to take it seriously, take it away, go and do some analysis on it, and then come back with the answer. And so sometimes you have to manage it in that way. But generally, look, it was utilizing the investor relations skills I built up at BT and trying to manage those five investors or four investors to at least see the problem consistently and then see that the solution we've offered was the best solution that you might have to that problem.
And that's an interesting statement you just said there. So see the problem consistently, and can you give us some examples of where you've applied that and how you did it? Because that sounds like an easy thing to say, but a very hard thing to actually put into practice.
Yeah, so when we were refinancing Arqiva into the bond market, it took about 3 years to do that, right? We started in 2010 and we got the bonds away in 2013. And the debt was due to be repaid in 2014. But as we went through that process, you can imagine that of the five investors, one or other of them was getting itchy to get it done and pushing faster. And, we were trying to say, look, until we've got the rating agencies in the right place, you won't get the right price for the bonds
Yeah,
unless you've done all of that work. So, we had to make sure that we'd done that work and got the right price. But obviously, some of them are more keen to get it done and are prepared to sacrifice a bit of price for that, and others
yeah,
are looking for the best value.
yeah.
So, giving them management and treasury advice and bringing the treasurer into the meeting and letting him explain exactly why that he felt we should wait, bringing the assistant treasurer into the meeting and let her explain exactly why the documentation could be better, etc., etc. Because you've got technical people on the board, so you can convince them with facts, but you have to have the right facts and you have to have a very strong argument. And so bringing people together and say, look, I know you want it done quick. I know you want it done at the best price, but let's go for a middle ground. We can get it done in this time frame and probably get near to the best price.
And what do you think is the most challenging thing about having multiple investors in a business? Because, like you said, you're lucky enough to have a single investor
Yeah,
that's managing that at the moment. When you've had that multiple piece, what was the biggest challenges that you experienced?
lack of goal congruence. That's
Mm,
It's simple. If they're not aligned on what they want, it's very hard for management to please everyone. Very
yeah,
hard. So keeping them aligned on what their target is, what their aim is, when they want to exit, what sort of challenges they want to set in terms of profitability. That's the hardest part, getting that goal congruence. And so, my preference now would always be to have one lead partner like we have in Octavius, managing the shareholders, but I'm dealing with Sullivan Street, and that we can align by having one conversation. Trying to bring five shareholders along and get them all to align is more difficult.
and from I guess getting to that point, how did you as a team, like you say, find that congruence? And how did you what did you do as a management team to to try and keep everybody in line? I would say, I'm not sure line is the right term, but
Yeah, so if you think about a management team, you've got the CFO, the CEO, the MDs, and the chairman.
yeah,
When it's about board messaging and about trying to get shareholders to agree, often that's where the chairman comes into his or her own, right?
yeah.
That's where the chairperson is driving that conversation and making sure that they're having the quiet conversations with each shareholder and saying, look, three of the shareholders are in this place. We need you to come along with us, and this is why. often you can't do that in the board meeting because it's there's too many people in the room and it's too
Yeah.
chaotic. So you have to get the chairperson to do that work, and that's where they earn their corn in terms of bringing that together. You as the CFO convince the chairperson, and then the chairperson has to go and convince the different shareholders who are not aligned. That's the best way to do it, because then they're seen as a bit more independent and they're sort of a middle person between the two, between the management and the shareholders.
And that's a really interesting piece about how do you as a CFO feel like what do you think a good sort of chairperson or chairman relationship looks like with the CFO? What did you do to, I guess, support that person through, and making sure that they have the right information at their fingertips to be able to do that?
Yeah, and look, I probably don't spend enough time on this, and I've learned over the years that this is time well spent. But CFOs often want to get their head down and just work, right? So we don't often say to the chairman, "Oh, let's have a chat for half an hour over a coffee." But the best way to manage a board is through the chairperson, and so having regular dialogue with the chairperson, the CFO, means that at least your goal congruent, and you're aligned in your views, and therefore when you say something at the board, you've got the chair backing you up. In
Yeah.
PE, often the chair is from that industry because the shareholders are from every industry. They're not necessarily industry focused, so they tend to hire a chair like they have at Octavius, who used to be in civil engineering and construction, and so often they look to the chair to have a view on something if it's very operational.
Mm.
Less so from a finance perspective, but often the chair is still important in bringing the disparate parties. If you've got more than one shareholder, bringing the disparate parties together, even on a finance thing. So having the ear of the chair and having that relationship with the chair is really important.
And you've mentioned you've learned that because that sounds like a really important lesson to learn over the years.
Yeah.
What else have you learned in terms of managing boards and investors and key stakeholders? Like, have you got any other hints or tips for our
Yeah,
listeners?
people who know me, and they'll be laughing when I say this, know that I often shoot from the hip, right? So, learning to hold your breath and say a bit less and talk outside, manage things outside the meeting a bit more is something that has taken me a while to get to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's a real temptation, isn't it, to try and jump in and fix the problem. I do think
Yeah,
CFOs like to be fixers. They like to
yeah,
have an answer for everything. So
correct,
yeah. And
correct. And look, if you know the answer or you believe you know the answer, you're desperate to say it and move on and tick off another issue. It's gone. you know,
yeah.
and, CFOs deal with a lot of volume. Let's not beat about the bush. We deal with a lot of volume. There's a million things coming in every day, and you've got to try and get nearly a million back out again, right? So when there's something comes up that is a bit sensitive, you want to nail it and move on, but at the same time, often it's not the best way to nail it by trying to have that conversation right now. And so taking it
Mhm.
away and doing some analysis and coming back and having a quiet conversation with someone sometimes is a better solution.
Mm.
Um, and some people will be laughing now, but I have learned that.
That sounds like a lesson well learned, to be fair, Phil. Um, and when you made that, because it sounds like you've shifted from PLC into PE. Were there any other, I guess, big culture shocks when you made that transition that you particularly noticed?
It's the almost daily involvement with the shareholders that
Mm.
is very different from PLC to PE. At any time, you can get emails coming in saying, "Can you just do? I've had a good idea. Why don't we have a look at this?" Doesn't matter where you are in the reporting cycle. Doesn't matter where you are at month end. And they'll usually want a quick answer. And if there's five of them, that can be quite a balancing act to manage. So definitely, I prefer having a single shareholder, and I think also having shareholders who are cognizant that management do know what they're doing and want to work with you, rather than tell you what to do, is really important.
And you obviously mentioned that as you looked at this latest role at Octavius, you almost subtly, potentially, but interviewed the private equity team to make sure it was a good fit for you as well as anything else. What sort of things were you looking for to make sure that it was a good kind of private equity partner? What were some of the questions that you were asking?
Are they people who are going to recognize your experience and judgment and
Mm,
listen to you? Or are they people who believe that, they've run many companies before and they know exactly what the answer is to every question?
mm,
And your job is to do their bidding.
yeah,
And as I say, in Sullivan Street and Octavius, it's very much a two-way conversation, and you could tell that from the interview conversation. And did we talk about other things in the interview? Did we talk about football? Did we talk about family and stuff like that? Did we
yeah,
talk about those sorts of things? Because if you are able to have those sorts of discussions with people, then you can build a relationship with them because they're human, and you can build. And if you've built a relationship with people, then they're much more likely to listen when you have something important to message to them,
yeah,
and at least they're going to give you the time and listen, and then you can have a two-way conversation to try and solve the problem. If you don't have a relationship with people, and it's very much, we tell you what to do, you go do it because you're management and we own you, that can be really difficult. And as I say, with Sullivan Street, it's much more that we have a symbiotic relationship.
that's brilliant to hear. Because yeah, like you said, it's not always the case.
No.
It's one of those those things that comes up about PE, but it's great to hear that it's not always the case, and there are some great PE companies like
Yeah.
Sullivan Street out there.
Yeah.
I guess one thing you said earlier in the podcast is you talked about the key thing with private equity is not to overpromise and underdeliver. Talk to me about how you personally look at managing the expectation for growth and increasing the value of the investment with 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 a realistic piece about where you can actually get. How do you find the balance in that piece?
Yeah, actually, it's with the PLC, you want to underpromise and overdeliver. With private equity, there's no room to underpromise because all the data's there, and so
Yeah.
you build a budget together, you build a long-term plan together, and obviously their job is to challenge you to make it as good as possible, and you also want to have a plan that's achievable. And we've been in both situations, where you're not achieving the plan or you are achieving the plan, and I can tell you, achieving the plan is a whole lot better than not achieving the plan. Um, but low aim isn't acceptable,
Yeah.
right? And we all know that. And I think part of the relationship is that they know that when you say, "I think this is a fair budget," you're not padding it, and you're not finding a way to make it too easy. And
Mm.
that trust takes time to build. So building that trust and being honest with them enables you to have better and better conversations over the years because you've built that trust. Things have gone exactly as you said. You've delivered sometimes, you've under-delivered sometimes, bonuses have been paid or not paid. And so, you build a piece of trust in terms of the fact that, when you say, I think I think 10's enough, then, and they say, can't you get 11? And you say, I could do 10 and a quarter, but I'm not sure I can get 11. Um, you can have a proper conversation rather than, they think you're padding it and they just say, well, it's 11, Phil, off you go, sort of thing.
Yeah. So I guess it's having the trust that you have an influence on where your budget's set.
Yeah,
If you go either way, if you consistently underperform or consistently overperform, you're almost doing yourself a disservice when you put a target on the figure
yeah.
in the first place.
And I think the honesty and the openness in terms of which you discuss the numbers and you discuss upsides and downsides and everything's on the table, that helps to build that relationship as well. Right? And
Mm.
then if you are open and that doesn't cause you problems, and you're encouraged to be open again. So it's a two-way street. It's
Yeah.
definitely works both ways.
And we've
I think
talked
they
a
get a
lot.
better answer, and we get a better style of management, and the company overall should do better as a result.
Yeah, you have that freedom to be open with them, and that's the
Yeah,
point, isn't it? You can be
yeah,
honest versus, worried about what their reaction's going to be.
yeah, exactly.
And how did you find the pace moving from PLC to private equity? Was there a discernible change to you? Did you notice a difference there?
Yeah, I think CFOs are quite action oriented, so I quite like the fact that PE is a bit faster paced. You're expecting to make decisions more quickly, and you can because you've got the freedom to do that, and you don't have to wait for the quarterly cycle to talk to the market and see how that lands and all that sort of thing. There's also a lot of corporate governance in a large PLC,
Yeah.
and for me, that was less interesting than actually doing the work, running the team, delivering the numbers, and helping the business to become a better business. For me, that's what gets me out of bed. The corporate governance side is a necessary thing, but it's so much now in PLC world that actually it slows things down. So in the P, get on with it because you've only got one set of shareholders to deal with, and you've only have one conversation and you can go. It's much more agile, and I prefer that world.
And, you mentioned obviously the competing and demands from a lot of investors. How did you manage sort of that responsiveness to investor demands, but also getting the day job done with, and making sure that the business itself is going where it needs to meet their goals? Like, was there any disciplines or anything that you thought about as you went through that process?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it involves putting in more hours, right? Sometimes because you can't not be there for the team, right? Because otherwise the day job doesn't get done and things fall apart. You have to be there for the team, but you also have to respond to requests from shareholders because they own the company, and that's only right. They are the owners of the company. So sometimes juggling that as a CFO just means putting in more hours. Sometimes that's how you have to do it. Sometimes it's about reprioritizing for the team. And I always think, it's very easy to prioritize stuff. What the team need me to do is actually deprioritize stuff so they know what they have to focus on. If I just say everything's important, that's not really helpful. So,
Yeah.
my job is to look at stuff and go, okay, you know what, don't do that, but do this.
Yeah.
But I think when you're prioritizing for people, you have to give them both the do and the don't. Just giving them the do isn't very helpful. And that's my job, I think.
Amazing. And so we have rapidly run out of time. This has been a brilliant conversation, Phil. But, what are your top recommendations for anyone going into maybe their first private equity role or shifting into PE, having come from a different environment? What would be your top tips for success?
Build a relationship early with the investors and their analysts. So that generally there'll be partners and then there'll be analysts as well. And you've got to build a relationship with both parties because the analyst is the one who's feeding the information to the partner. But build that relationship, and that involves cups of tea or drinks down the pub or whatever, so that you've got a more open relationship. When things go wrong, be early. Once you know it's gone wrong, be early in messaging that to them so that they come inside the tent and help you solve it, rather than wait till it's too late and then you say something too far down the road, and then it's a big problem to solve, and nobody likes surprises.
No.
And so much better to involve them in difficult things as early as you can. But build upfront, build that relationship. That was a big plus if you can do that. And build that trust, and both ways, right? And assess who you're going to be dealing with before you go in. And as you said, find out what the key things they need you to deliver over the next 2 years are, and whether you believe you have the skills to deliver that or the desire to deliver that. So you wouldn't want to go into a massive refinancing knowing that you're going to spend half your time on financing if you really don't want to be doing treasury stuff. So you have to find that out early on. So you need to find out from them what they want from you for the first 2-3 years of that role, and see whether that aligns with what you'd like to do.
That's amazing. Thanks so much for. And if our listeners want to learn more about you and what you've done, or perhaps more about Octavius, where is the best place to find?
Probably catch me on LinkedIn. Probably the best place. Yeah.
Brilliant. And it's always good to get a book recommendation. So if you had to recommend a book, what would it be?
I like the Jack Reacher books. Sometimes as a CFO, a bit of vigilante action is probably it's an escape.
Nice escape and get the blood pumping for that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Phil, for taking the time to talk us through your journey. It's been great to learn from your experience around managing investors and that shift from PLC to PE. So thank you again.
And thank you for asking me. Thank you.
So to all of our listeners, if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please, of course, let me know. If you have any questions, topics, whether that's about investor relations, PE, life in PLC, then let me know. I'm looking for inspiration for our new series. So thank you so much for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time on the CFO 4.0 podcast.
One of the hardest things, I think, is actually putting into words what it means to work with myself and the team here at ITAS. Because not only are we a financial transformation consultancy, but we do it using Sage technology. So rather than me tell you how awesome we are, let me introduce one of our customers.
Working with ITAS has dramatically made our lives simpler because there's just such a knowledgeable team there to help us. Before, we felt the consultants we were working with at another company, it was always a challenge to get information out of them, for them to understand the problem, and it just didn't feel like they were on our team. Working with ITAS, it's almost, we feel like you are all employed with us to work with us to do it. It's an absolutely fantastic relationship, and it's just made it such a smoother process and an absolute fun process working in Sage Intact and coming on our calls. I look forward to it now.